Regulated activities of the Food and Drug Administration are in large measure financed directly by the pharmaceutical companies.
More than 50% of the money that the FDA spends reviewing drugs comes from the pharmaceutical companies. Many people see that as an absurd conflict of interest, and indeed many are calling for an end to such user-pays funding.
That destroys this arm's length relationship. This destroys the distance that ought to prevail between the Food and Drug Administration and the pharmaceutical companies.
And once that funding started coming from the drug companies, they started calling the shots. And basically they said, we're not going to continue to provide this funding unless you help us get these drugs to market. So basically the FDA got marching orders in the mid-90s, started helping bring drugs to market, do it quickly, and they basically have served those masters ever since. We've really been betrayed by the FDA, and that's the only way to put it.
Well, it's kind of weird, but the day before I had my stroke, I couldn't find home plate. You know, I was pitching batting practice to my kids, which I do all the time, and I just could not throw a strike to save my life. Even now I have a little bit more trouble than I used to. Well, I started taking anti-inflammatory drugs in the year 1999. In, I believe it was January of 2002, I switched over to Vioxx, and I was taking it probably 3 or 4 times a week for about 6 months.
Nice.
I'll never forget it. It was a Monday. I collapsed at work. I had a stroke right then and there at work. Found myself in the hospital that afternoon. As a result of that, I couldn't walk. I couldn't speak effectively.
We have thousands of people who are being injured by products that the companies know are unsafe. I mean, that FDA knows it's unsafe. FDA knew there was a problem with Vioxx. They knew there was a big problem back in mid-2000. They did nothing about it.
The left side of my body is, doesn't work right. And I was working with a piece of woodworking and the blade hit my thumb and scared to death. It's all going up for sale. Every bit of it. And this is all industrial grade stuff.
To this day, I have a sleep disorder. I have panic disorder. I have extreme fatigue, which is related due to the sleep disorder.
FDA is responsible for 140,000 heart attacks, 60,000 dead Americans. That's as many people as were killed in the Vietnam War.
I'm a family physician and, had a thriving practice basically at the peak of my professional career, a passionate practice. I did the majority of my work with kids with psychiatric and psychological disorders, and the type of job I could have done for nothing. Unfortunately, since my stroke, we've had to put our house up for sale. As a result of the disability, I've been unable to work. And to tell you the truth, we can't even afford to sell the house with this real estate agent, because of the commission that they obtain from it, so I believe what happened to me is a direct result of Vioxx. It's the only explanation that has any merit, and the only logical, simplistic explanation that I can arrive at is that Vioxx caused this situation to occur in my life.
How did this happen? How do we end up having something that can kill 100,000 Americans? And who's responsible?
I think a lot of people think that the approval of drugs by the FDA is tantamount to the FDA guaranteeing that the drug is safe as well as effective. And the truth of the matter is, we never know that to a certainty.
People are frequently under the mistaken impression that once a drug is approved by the FDA, it's extremely safe. In fact, there are very few long-term studies done on particular drugs, and it's not at all uncommon for a drug to be removed from the marketplace because it has been shown to be unsafe.
the FDA is empowered to require drug companies to continue clinical trials of drugs even after they've been approved. And this option, the phase 4 clinical trials, they're called, is especially useful for drugs that have received expedited review through the FDA. In other words, the FDA has agreed to approve drugs faster than it otherwise would. The trouble is, phase 4 clinical trials aren't used nearly as often as they should be used.
What is the real relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA?
As a drug